Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Gurnaam Singh, and I'd like to welcome you to a very special, Baisakhi special Sikh think tank program, which some of you will know. We've piloted 1 or 2 programs. We're still in the kind of developmental stages, but hopefully very soon we will be putting out regular weekly programs. Today we're going to be discussing the Paira Joanna phenomena, but not just discuss what's been going, but to really where we are going and what the future holds for Sikhs. I'll just introduce the panel and then we'll get straight into our discussion. On my right we have by Jeet Singh Baines, who's from Croydon. Bhai Sahib is a management consultant and he's a councillor in the London Borough of Croydon. I won't mention the party, but you can guess for yourself as a management consultant. Bhai Sahib Ji is one of the inspirations behind the Sikh think tank, and in fact he's notionally the director of the Sikh think tank in the sense that he's been driving this forward, and maybe later on we will be able to talk about some of the kind of ideas that we have for the future. So welcome Bhai Sahib Ji. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. We have Bhai Sukhwinder Singh on my immediate right. Sukhwinder again is a well-known figure in the Sikh community. He's actually worked for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and it's really in that capacity as opposed to his various other roles that we've got him here today. And again, another valuable contributor to the Sikh think tank. So welcome. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. And on my left we have by Harjinder Singh Lally. You tend to see Harjinder in kurta pajama with various instruments in his hands, doing beautiful kirtan and katha. What most people don't know is that besides his expertise, I would say Ustad in classical Sangeet, he's also a very respected academic in his own right. He's a senior teaching fellow in cyber security at the University of Warwick, my old university, so in fact we're very close to each other. So welcome to the show. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So the Sikh think tank Baisakhi special, first of all, let's start by giving everybody happy Baisakhi. Baisakhi ni lakh lakh vadaiyan. Baisakhi is about many things. Most of all, I think it's about renewal. It's about new birth, new beginnings. It's a line in the sand. Guru Gobind Singh Ji in 1699 drew a line in the sand. He offered a challenge to the Khalsa, to the people of Punjab. And just as in April 1699, once again I think the Sikh nation is at a crossroads, where Sikh history is being made on a daily basis. We are living through exciting yet precarious times. Not too different, dare I say, to the prevailing climate back in 1699 when Guru Gobind Singh Ji gave the nation a new identity and a new purpose. But today, following the phenomenal awakening of the Sikh Panth, the unification of the Panth through the thought of Bhai Balwant Singh Rajwana, once again I think we are faced with similar questions about our future, about our identity, about our place in India and about our place in the world. So we're going to be, in a sense, combining this idea of renewal of the Sikh Panth looking for a direction and the kind of contemporary situation that we are with. We've got 4 themes that we're going to be exploring in today's program. I'll just tell you what they are, and we're going to try and devote equal time to all of them. First of all, we're going to be looking at this label that Sikhs have been given since 1984, particularly, of being terrorists and extremists. Secondly, we're going to be talking about the role of the media. Again, something new, very dramatic, of the last 2 or 3 years, has a completely new kind of piece in the jigsaw, if you want, for Sikhs. The role of the media and how important it is and how can we develop that. The third one, really linked to that, is how can we make our case in the world? Have we been making it well? How can we develop new forms, new ways of making our case? And fourthly, we're going to be talking about moving forward, and particularly there we want to be talking about whether we should be now advocating, why should we be exploring a peace and reconciliation process, and what would be the kind of advantages and dangers in that. So these are the kind of 4 themes that we're going to be looking at. But just, I'm going to start with you, Sukhwinder Singh, because you work with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and I know that Sikhs have made many kind of pleas to the European Commission, to the UN, and of course our British-based one. But often what happens when we go to governmental organisations, they have this image of us as being terrorists, as people who really are there promoting violence, and sometimes our pleas fall on deaf ears. Where do we get this label from? Are we responsible to some degree in propagating that label? Is it an unfair label? I mean, where did the story start, really?
Yeah, just first to clarify, really, although I work at the Quality and Human Rights Commission, my views today are basically my own views.
Personal views, yeah,
and not anything to do with the
I
Commission.
think that's the case for all of us.
Just to clarify that.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think the important thing is in terms of when the question is asked, a lot of times the notion of terrorism or extremism come up. So, and I think for us, from a Sikh point of view, the way we've handled it in a lot of ways is very much in terms of actually asking the point in terms of what's the definition of a terrorist? What do you mean by a terrorist? And I think that spins it round, because if you actually look at it, it's the propagation by the Indian government, which would be expected. Their lobbying is much greater than ours. And one of the things they've portrayed from day one is that Sikhs are terrorists. And the reason for that is what they want to do is hide the fact that actually it was state terrorism. And the reaction to state terrorism was what happened after '84, where educated youngsters, educated people, and if you look at books, for example, by Cynthia Mahmood, Faith and Nation, that identifies why individuals actually took up arms. And if you actually analyse in terms of, a definition of a terrorist is somebody that terrorises people. And actually, if you look at what the state done, compared to what happened during the armed struggles, I think that will clarify itself in terms of actually who were the terrorists. And I think from a Sikh perspective, I think it's very much, we need to turn around and say actually what Sikhs were doing is terror resists. We're actually resisting state terrorism. That's what we were doing.
Jeet, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And this is basically the problem we've got. We haven't got anybody representing our cause.
Yeah, I think, it's very easy to label somebody with a label. Yeah, and I think our weakness has been we haven't been able to make the case of all the other things that Sikhi represents. So that when somebody puts a label on a Sikh or anybody else, the whole idea of sticking a label on them and saying that's the only thing you are, I think a way forward for us would be to try and make the case that whatever labels you're putting on us, there are many, many other facets which are being ignored about Sikhi. And that would be a sort of a positive way forward to take that label away from us.
Harinder Singh, if you go onto YouTube and you type in Sikh freedom fighters or Sikh freedom movement, you find images of armed warriors, machine guns. To some extent, we've kind of internalized that idea that's been created about us as being these people who go around shooting. I mean, this isn't the reality. I mean, the reality is that we are victims, and we know that. But do you think that we have inadvertently bought into the idea, this kind of militant, Jujaru, this concept of Jujaru?
Well, I think there's a few things. First of all, Sukhvinder said that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Yeah. We have to be very careful. First of all, there is no universally accepted definition of terrorism. So if we try to challenge, someone or a state's definition of terrorism, we have to accept that, in fact, there is no universal definition. So in the eyes of a lot of states, what, for instance, Rajwana did was an act of terror. We, I think, are hiding, and we're not accepting that, in the eyes of the media, for instance, that would quite possibly, and I think is, because there's an article in the, I think it's the Mercury, the Birmingham Mercury, which, quite blatantly said that he's a terrorist. Now, what we've, I think, ended up doing is spending a lot of time and energy challenging that definition in the last 3 or 4 weeks, not realizing that, in fact, we're going to struggle to kind of challenge that definition, right? And to us, us, defending, our people, defending people in Punjab, is something we're brought up. Our ideology has been ingrained in our genes, almost in our spiritual beliefs. That's what we do. I mean, Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib gave their life for the Hindu Qawm. That's what we believe, but the way other people see that, sometimes you have to put someone else's glasses on to see, in their lens, how we are being portrayed. And up till now, my view is, and it may be quite controversial, but my view is we have preached out to everyone with, wearing our own pair of glasses, but we haven't looked at what they're seeing and tried to present a message across to them as to how they would see it. Other nations do it very well. I mean, you look at Israel, Palestine, and all the kind of the struggles around the world,
Yeah.
they seem to get their message across much more clearly than we do. And they have a way of talking to the media, and I know we're talking about this later on.
Well,
but
it's all
this
linked,
is
really,
something
it's
that
all linked.
we've,
Look,
I think,
can I
not
just take
done
that?
very
'Cause
well
I think
at
that's a
all.
very useful. I mean, anybody can respond to this.
Sorry, one more point.
Yeah.
We've got to bear in mind that this is in that documentary earlier in the week. 9/11 has changed everything. You know, pre 9/11, we might not have been seen in the same way as we were post 9/11, and in fact, you know, we had the Singh in, I think it was America, who was shot dead because he was mistaken for a Muslim. He was mistaken for terrorism. And post 9/11, you know, when we live in a very hyper-tense, hyper-anxious age, where you know, just last week we had a number of kind of Muslim extremists. Now I'm calling them Muslim extremists. They probably wouldn't, but you know, Muslim extremists who are now going to be extradited to the States. You know, this is the kind of age we're now living in.
So we've got the two problems really. One problem is that the embodiment of a Sikh, of a person with a turban and a beard. Maybe before 9/11, it was of a yogi, of somebody, you know, an Indian yogi type of person, But after 9/11, because of the association with Bin Laden, the image of somebody with a turban and beard became one of a dangerous person.
I tend to disagree to a certain extent. I think if you look at the fact in terms of we were called terrorists, etc., actually that was very much pro 9/11. That's the reality. When people look back at the period from 1984 to 1995, when the troubles were at a height in Punjab, and that's the point at which a lot of people were calling us terrorists, and were saying we're terrorists. I think in reality we have moved a lot. I think if you look at after the arms struggle in terms of the way people are reacting, the way people are actually then highlighting injustices in terms of, and actually asking the question, which is very important. And the question should be asked in terms of actually, why did people react the way they did after 1984? I think that's the most important thing. If you look at anything, it's exactly saying, why did somebody do what they did? And how can we stop that happening again? That's the ultimate question we need to be looking at, is if individuals, for example, took up arms at that time, why did that happen? And how can we stop history repeating itself?
I think we need to be careful, because I think we are, again, falling into the trap, the propaganda trap that's been set about us. I would reject that Sikhs ever took armed struggle on a kind of, on a choice basis.
But no, it's a reaction. That's what I said. It's a reaction to state terrorism.
Yeah. And I would say, secondly, actually, 1984, if you think about it, it was actually the state that launched a military assault on the Sikhs. That's the first thing. And then for months afterwards, they were basically committing genocide. Secondly, you had seen what happened in November in Delhi. Then after that, you saw Byan Singh coming and wiping out any kind of resistance there was. Actually, Sikhs never, as far as I can see, I mean, these forces that we had, Khalistan, this force, they were small groups of people who were bravado. Okay, there were some that were highly trained and who you could say were international terrorists in the way in which that's defined.
Defined, yeah.
Yeah, in the way in which it might be defined as people who use extrajudicial methods, who would use bombings and all. Just to put that definitely. There were some like that, but most of them were just ordinary young people who got terrorized in their own villages, who went out and tried to settle feuds.
And I think that's the ultimate thing. That's what we're saying in terms of when people call you a terrorist. Actually, it's saying you're going back to and say, well, actually, why are you calling an individual that?
Yeah.
And actually, what was it that a normal, in a lot of circumstances, a normal person who's studying at college, studying at university, actually has to do what they have to do.
There's a very fundamental point here. We have a lot of Sikhs who are very anti-Khalistan, anti-Bhindranwala, and as soon as you mention human rights and Rajwan or anything, they'll turn off. They have very embedded views. But what we have to do is get to the absolute crux of the problem and present this human rights issue to them and make them aware of what was happening. There's very, very few villages in Punjab that were not touched, and there's very few of us who directly or indirectly were not touched by innocent people being taken out of their homes, and that is the message that I think everyone can relate to.
Absolutely.
Whether, whatever your political views, whatever your, religious, spiritual views, that is the one point that everyone should relate to, and that is the one point that the whole Western media relates to. And I often wonder whether we focus too much energy on making the other points, and a lot more vocally and a lot more loudly, and these human rights issues we don't spend as much time and energy doing.
You're right. I think the hidden story, which we haven't been able to tell anybody, is the fact that after '84, actually they wiped out a whole generation. It was totally... It's similar to in terms of what happened in the former Baltic states, where individual males from the age of 18 to about 25, 30 were actually taken out of their villages and killed. A whole generation was wiped out. And as a consequence of that, this is what we're having in Punjab today. The fear of grown-ups of that time actually saying we want our individuals to be Sikhs.
I mean, we'll come back to that, because in a sense, in terms of our case, and that issue is there for us to deal
Certainly,
with.
yeah.
And we'll come back to when we talk about moving forward. Just final point on this image of the kind of extremist terrorist land. I want to ask you this one. Israel, I mean, Harjinder's already mentioned Israel, yeah? I mean, Israel uses whatever it wants to use when, it'll send rockets into the Gaza Strip, it will bomb Iran, it will do what it wants. But when their spokespeople appear in front of the cameras, they're not in military uniform. They'd even deny that they've done these things. And they're very eloquent, and they use the language of international kind of diplomacy of governance. Do you think that that's where we failed, in the sense that we haven't presented our case? In fact, we kind of almost confirm the prejudices that they have about us.
I come back to this issue of the label. Yeah? The label, it's very, very easy for other people to label us either as extremist or radical, or all these other words that come along, right? Sikh, and then these other labels come along. And I think we're a long way from being presentable in the way that you're suggesting. I think some of the things that we can do to lose the label is to create a situation where if somebody puts that label on you, it's patently a ridiculous thing to say. So you don't ever hear... extremist Buddhist, right? You never hear about sort of terrorist Buddhist, because it's a ridiculous thing to say, right? And I think we need to arrive at a position whereas if somebody puts a label on a Sikh, it's patently a ridiculous thing to say and everybody knows it. And then it's actually the person who's using the label who looks silly saying it. And I think some of the things that we can do to achieve that, and I'm not negating any of the issues there have been for Sikhs in the last 20, 30 years, but moving forward, I think some of the things we can do is promote all those other aspects about Sikhi. You mentioned we're sort of known for our martial tradition. Absolutely. But we should also be known for many, many other things. The seva aspect, central. You go to any gurdwara, what's going on? It's seva. We need to make that known to everybody, right? That we feed the hungry. I know there are Sikh groups who visit prisoners in prison. Those kind of things, we need to have the image of a Sikh known as this is what a Sikh is all about. Then I think those labels just look ridiculous.
That is such an important point, because one of the regrets that I have about the campaign, and look, I don't want it to be this to become negative discussion, it's got to be constructive. However, it's this issue of Sarbat da Bala, which is where we started to talk about this from a week or so ago, where we're campaigning to have the death penalty removed for one particular prisoner. This is where the crux of the campaign was 2 weeks ago. Whereas as Sikhs, what we probably should have done was spend all that time and energy when we had the momentum to campaign for the removal of the death penalty full stop. And try to relate, try to get the whole of India relate with that cause. It's the whole Paikanaya scenario. So that the world sees that actually the Sikhs, they're not, yes, there is this one guy, he's brought this campaign to the forefront and, awoken the whole nation. But actually what they want is to, remove the death penalty for all prisoners. And not just that, what they're also asking for is a fair treatment of all prisoners. We've got, we've still got people being held 8, 9 years without charge. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. And these are the kind of campaigns that we should...
So again, there, I think the issue, we've got to talk about facts, right? We don't want to talk about suppositions or emotion. Dealing with facts, we've got to deal with those facts and say, what's the issue here? And the issue here is the death penalty fair and humane thing to do? I think that's an issue that needs to be discussed. And another issue is, if somebody's served a longer than average sentence for a given crime, should that person receive a second punishment for the same crime, i.e. the death penalty, when the person's already served numerous years in jail? And we should make that argument for anybody who's in that situation.
Well, actually, I don't even know what a Sikh theological position is on the death penalty. I mean, we've kind of slipped into being against the death penalty as a con, but when did we have the discussion? When did we actually explore where the Sikh theology is?
I think if you look at two things first. I think if you look at in terms of approach, for example, the Sikh community did actually have a meeting at the United Nations Human Rights Commission about this case. And actually from day one, the issue has been, what we've tried to do is to say, okay, let's put to one side what Balwant Singh actually did. Because if you start defending that, as you've said, you'll get bogged down into defending that. The important point was, as Jita said, was to say, okay, here's an individual. And let's be realistic. It's no use hiding. Here's an individual who, in the eyes of the law, has committed a crime. In the eyes of the law. In the eyes of the community, he might be a political prisoner, a hero. But in the eyes of the law, and therefore in the eyes of the international media, the international community, individual who's committed a crime. Our point was very much going back to the point of, put that to one side. You've got an individual here who's served 17 years in prison. 17 years, which is life sentence. Yeah, that's the point we want to look at. Secondly, the whole issue of the death penalty. The campaign we started in Geneva at the United Nations is very much in terms of saying, actually, if you look at the United Nations instruments and conventions that have been signed, the majority of the United Nations is against the death penalty. And the point was that actually India has broken its moratorium against the death penalty. And that was the whole issue. And if you look at the statement of the Jathedar, what he made at that meeting, in terms of resolution, he did say that we will start a world campaign against the death penalty. So I think that was very constructive, where we came up with an idea, and the Jathedar actually endorsed it and took that forward.
That's the kind of thing, you see. I think if you deal with facts, deal with the issue, I know it can be boring and it's a bit dry, and you don't venture frustration, you know. But I think facts are your friends. You've got to deal with the issue. You've got to separate emotion from fact. You've got to separate the people from the problem and deal with the problem and make the case on the issues. So because I think if you do that, then you arrive at a point where you're talking about winning arguments, right? And nobody can then put a label on you.
I think, I think it's very important before I lose this point. The other point we've actually taken on board is if you look at the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 5 talks about fair treatment and against torture. Now, if you look at the factual aspect, actually you've got a person, Balwant Singh, Jagtang Singh Hawara, lots of others, for 17 years have actually undergone psychological torture, not knowing that they could be hanged the next day or the day after. And I think that's the point we need to take.
That is
inhumane treatment. Again, Article 5, the United Nations Human Rights Declaration, that's what we have to portray, and that's the message we need to get across.
If you put that into a Western context, and there was a Western prisoner here in the UK who had been subjected to the same, there would be an absolute outcry. And we have not, again, you know, it's getting that message across. Now, I mean, Sukhvinder Singh, you've made a very interesting point there about the meeting in Geneva. And you mentioned a number of other high-profile meetings that took place in the last few weeks, which I don't know if it leads on to the next point, but we didn't quite get that across, you know, very clearly to highlight where this campaign is actually reaching. And you know, I'm quite disappointed, I think, as a community that we didn't.
Well, this is part. I think this is part of what Deeth's saying is that actually we do secure victories. They might be boring in the sense that they might not be dramatic, kind of. You know,
it's not the shouting.
Yes, but just this week, I mean,
it's far more effective.
Just this week, you know, the Indian government has finally agreed, and I've got a letter here from the Akal Takht, to implement the Anand Marriage Act. Now, the Anand Marriage Act was actually, I think it was passed by the British in 2011 or somewhere around there. And that's really the important piece of legislation.
Early 20th century, I think.
1911. And that was such a significant piece of legislation because that is the only legislative basis, so far I know, in Indian history or British, where the Sikhs were recognised as a separate nation. The Anand Marriage Act was the first point. And in fact, that's why after 47 and independence, the Indian government did not want to implement it because that would have contradicted the Indian constitution, which itself doesn't recognise Sikhs as a separate nation. But the fact that we've got this, I think, again, opens those cracks up. And it might not open the kind of, it might not give us Khalistan, but it opens up a crack.
I think that's right. And I think it comes a little bit back to this idea of anybody who would deny that Sikhism is a separate religion or a separate identity, that person denying it looks ridiculous saying it. Yeah. And in a way, this is the fruition of that.
Absolutely.
That, to maintain a stance that Sikhism is a part of something else, or that Sikhism is not its own identity. Frankly, the person saying that is the person who's looking ridiculous, right? And why don't we recognize that reality? There's nothing threatening in doing that. And you know,
okay, I'm going to move us on now because of time. I'm going to, Jindan, I'm going to come to you because you're working in cyber security, so you know a lot about the power of the internet, the power of social media, the power of electronic means for crime and for prevention and all these other things. 3 years ago, I mean, the Sikhs really, we were defeated, let's be honest. Okay, we had our annual demonstration in Hyde Park, which was diminishing and diminishing. We had the odd letter flying about to the MPs. But by and large, I think that, we were defeated. Our cause had reached a kind of end point. And then all of a sudden, we get the emergence of a Sikh media, television media. We had the Punjab radio, we had something there. And we have an explosion. All of a sudden, the Sikh movement, the Sikh cause is rejuvenated. To the point, I think, that in this current Rajwana case, if it wasn't for the independent Sikh media, Sikh channel, Sangat TV here, then the Indian government may not have shifted the way it did. So, are we exploiting the power of media appropriately? What can we do? What are the kind of possibilities?
Well, when we talk about the media, we need to look at two aspects. I would, just for the sake of this point, categorize social networking sites within this, although it would stand at the periphery of my definition of media. Okay. What we saw in Egypt a couple of years ago with the Arab Rising was, even now we're seeing in some states where they are blacking out any kind of media contact. You're not getting any news stories coming out, but Facebook and social networking sites are telling us exactly what's going on in those states. We've got YouTube and videos being posted there. So we're now in a situation where even if the government of India, imposed a news blackout, what's happening in India would still reach everyone in India. Because it would bounce out of India to us and then back into India through all the social networking sites and all the kind of the media channels that we have. Now, what's happened here is something that's actually quite phenomenal. We had a campaign that has touched literally hundreds of thousands of Sikhs around the world, because of the efforts, and this is a bit of cheeky product placement in a way, but because of the efforts of Sikh Channel and Sangat TV. And, we saw a story which I first saw breaking on Facebook, about 2 days, I think it was, before suddenly it hit the TV channels that, the announcement has been made that, on the 31st, Rajwana will be hung. And then as soon as it hit the Sikh channel, we saw what's happening over there. Then what's happened is we've got a new generation of Sikhs who suddenly became much, much more aware of the human rights issues and the injustices that have been served. I mean, my 7- and 9-year-olds, and this is an embarrassment to me, really, that I hadn't sat down with them and said, this is what happened in 1984. But as a result of all this, and seeing all these scenes on TV, they wanted to know what's been going on. And I thought, gosh, I've actually never sat down and told them about this. So then we sat down, went through videos that, should carry a, warning in terms of how gruesome they were. And it hit them that this is what happened to the Sikhs in 1984, and this wouldn't have happened,
So what you're kind of saying is that the new social media and the TV media has had a kind of inward effect, as it were, intrinsic to the community, as you talked about, but also an outward effect. Now I want to come to Jeeth. Does this open up the possibility that David can defeat Goliath? In the sense, can we sat in a studio in Birmingham now shake the Indian government? Is that what's happening? Are the rules of the game now being changed?
I mean, I'd agree 100% with what Sukhjinder said. Is Harjinder. Wrong guy.
You're thinking about the singer. He's a singer, but not that one.
The game has changed, hasn't it? With YouTube, mobile phones, people can record, put it on the internet. Nobody can hide it. You know, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? When things are done in secret, all of those things that happened in 84, Darbar Sahib was attacked, 36 other gurdwaras attacked, news blackout, nobody knows about it. That could not happen today because someone somewhere is going to record it. What happened in Gurdaspur when the kid was shot?
Jaspal Singh
was shot, right? And it's there on YouTube. You can see, you can hear the gunshots. You can see the policemen, filthy swearing, knocking down doors, all of that. Now, if that had not been recorded and put on YouTube for everybody to see, it'd be even worse things going on now, right? I think so, absolutely right. Any government would be, or any person who's doing a wrong thing would be, pretty fearful of that. And they are forced to do the right thing.
Is this why, we are now moving away from armed struggle or, militant struggle? Is this the new battlefield? Is it,
I think it definitely is. I think, with all fairness, we have to acknowledge the work that individuals have done since 84 onwards. Because you have different phases.
Oh, absolutely.
And movements and campaigns go through different phases. External factors in terms of modern technology, the political environment, the economic environment, all has an impact on the campaigns you're doing. And I think what we've got here is actually the Sikh community actually going into a new phase of technology. And I think what the media has done is played a fantastic role in terms of highlighting that. But more importantly for me, I think it's actually brought to maybe people of my generation the reality that actually, do you know what, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, these are the new technologies. And the challenge for us is that for the youth, they're the ones that are going to be using this mode of communication. But what's important for people of experience is to actually put the right messages to those youth. So they are portraying the right messages, what we want the messages to portray.
Yeah, let's...
Just one, I think, absolutely new media, but I think also the new channels.
Yes,
Sikh channel, I'm not saying it because I'm sitting in Sikh channel. It's done an amazing, extraordinary thing to highlight these things and show it. Because if you look at the mainstream media in India, in Punjab, the most you will see is a bit of an interview like this with, and some of it is quite in-depth interviews, but no one's going to the ground level, into the villages, into people's houses and saying, what do you think? It's just opening up people's eyes.
A few days ago, I saw Dr. Gurdeep Singh Jagveer outside Bangla Sahib Gurdwara. I don't know if you saw that, interviewing ordinary Sikhs, asking them about what did they remember from 84 November. And the horror stories that they were coming out with, they said never have told anybody of how, when we would talk about dead and and we think that maybe there was the odd incident that we've blown out of proportion and we use that emotive. Every other person that was being interviewed, it was like it was systematic. And I was almost in tears, I'll tell you, when I saw that. And this is somebody who's seen it all. I thought that I knew what's been happening for the last 25 years.
Yeah, well, Gurnam Singh, it was these kind of discussions and scenes that, forced me to think, hold on, I haven't even spoken about this to my children, right? But and I don't want to put a downer on this, but let's not get overexcited, because if we don't use the media effectively, then we will struggle to get our message across out of anywhere but our own community. Now, these TV stations, they serve our community extraordinarily well, but do they get the message out beyond that, beyond that community? And you mentioned a David and Goliath situation. What we have managed to do is we have managed to rattle the cage in India. It was a result of this campaign that we saw, all kinds of action being taken over there. But what we have to ask is, can we use the media more effectively? Was there any kinks in the way that we used the media? Could we have done something better? Could we have portrayed this better? Could we have used this media to reach the BBC channel? You see BBC channel using coverage from various media channels. For instance, they used the Sangat footage when there were the riots. Right. So what we want to do now is move the Sikh channel to a phase now where other TV channels feel confident in using the material generated by the Sikh channel. So the Sikh channel has to sell. I don't mean financially. I mean figuratively.
I think
they have to
it
sell.
makes the case, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And I think it ties a little bit back into what we were saying before. That whatever's happened in the last few weeks, new channels, new technology, people becoming aware of it. There is a really goodwill, good-spirited, wanting the best for Sikhi audience of Sikhs out there who are not normally engaged with Sikh issues. You know, really educated, successful, new generation of Sikhs who don't know a lot about what's been happening in the last 20 years, or maybe they don't even care. But there is a group of them who are really attracted now to get involved, and I think we really need to not lose that goodwill and pull them in, and kind of give them free rein to do what they think is the right thing.
You know, there's Sajdari, a lot of Sajdaris. I mean, I was watching on Sikh channel today, in Italy, the Nagar Kirtan, and it almost reminded me of '84, when the majority of the people in the demonstration were Sajdari. The same thing's happening over, it's been replayed. A whole generation of Sikhs who have been lost to our cause have found a way back in. But I just want to, we've only got about 15, 20 minutes.
Very quickly, the challenge for us, and you've hit it on the head really, the challenge for us is that the media is doing its job. And one of the things we were quite clear of in terms of the media actually doesn't take over the community, right? And I think that's where the community's got a responsibility. The media is doing its job in terms of raising the awareness, letting people know what's happening. The challenge for us all now is to actually, you can raise awareness, you can raise the issues, but actually it's about offering solutions.
Okay, well, let me kind of, because I think in a sense what you're saying is that, you know, we don't want to become couch potato revolutionaries, yeah? that our revolution is sit in front of the Sikh channel all day, you know. And which is really the next point, the discussion point, which is making our case. Now, since 1984, you know, whenever something's happened to Sikhs, the first thing is, I say, Jalus kar diye. Yeah? And demonstration, you know, public show of unity is universally recognised form of protest, and we shouldn't dismiss the power of that. But is it a time to rethink our strategy? Should we be booking coaches from Glasgow through the Midlands down to go to Hyde Park every year? Or should we be saying to the people in Glasgow, you go to George Square in the centre of Glasgow? We say to the people in Manchester, you go into the Piccadilly Square. You know, in Birmingham, you go into Chamberlain Square or whatever. Every Saturday you put leaflets out, you talk to people, and this is the way that you're going to influence, rather than an annual trip down to Hyde Park. I'm being provocative deliberately to make the point.
I think there's two issues. I think in terms of just like, this was actually tried about 3 or 4 years ago in terms of, we had the candlelight vigils for 1984. And it was very successful in terms of, I think it was about 8 or 9 major cities on the same night actually had that. But the reality is, in terms of getting people to do that, and I think in any campaign, you need to look across the spectrum of a campaign. A campaign will involve a lot of
But we've got the media now. We have people in every town sat down watching.
Well, you've made an interesting point. It's a campaign which has to be planned. And I don't know how much, I mean, you know, I haven't been involved, you know, perhaps embarrassing to myself, in the actual organising of the campaign, but the campaign has to be planned so that each, you know, we want to achieve the maximum impact with what we do.
Certainly.
And if the maximum impact is going to be achieved in 2 weeks' time rather than this Saturday for the Nagar Kirtan, then so be it. That's when we do it. In terms of the message that we get across in posters and in statements to the press, it has to be planned. I mean, people have publicists, you know, hired to manage your campaign, you know, and that was raised, I think, a week ago on Sikh channel, that perhaps we should have hired someone to manage this campaign for us. I mean, we've got people in the community who can do that.
I'll tell you, I mean, I've been, over the years as an academic, one of our jobs is to write and publish, but it's very difficult to actually get into the mainstream. And a few years ago, my university employed a PR consultants, and they came and spoke with me. Within weeks, I was getting contact from The Guardian, from mainstream media saying, would you like to publish an article in here, or in professional journals? Short articles. And in many ways, they're much easier to produce those short pieces than the long 4,000-word peer-reviewed. And it had so much more effect. And so I'm absolutely convinced that PR is the way forward.
But just to let you know, in terms of, if you're aware of the fact that we all work with the Sikh Council UK, and one of the things we've identified, and we're in the process of actually interviewing 2 PR companies for that. Because one of the things we identified, collectively everybody worked together, and I think the Sikh channel played a tremendous role in terms of setting up the Sikh Council. But that was one of the things we've identified in terms of outputs and measuring yourself. One of the things we decided as Sikh Council to measure ourselves was have a number of objectives. And one of those objectives was actually to set up a PR network or a PR company actually can do the work for us. And hopefully within about 2 or 3 weeks' time, we'll actually have signed that contract. Because Leamington, for example, when they had the opening of their Gurdwara, they actually hired a PR company.
We did,
And look at the success they had. So I think you're right. And I think things are on the ground that are happening.
I think that's fantastic, isn't it? Right? And I think it's got to be an outcome focus. You've got to think, what's the outcome you want, not what shall I do today and what shall I do tomorrow. Think about the outcome and plan for that. There's a limit to how much you can plan. I would also leave a bit of room for letting people do what they think they can do and get involved. People who maybe not necessarily be the usual guys who get involved.
And then on small work.
You may have to bring on board people who you don't normally get on with,
Absolutely.
but they are the best people for the job.
Can I make one more suggestion? You know, when I don't know about you, but I love watching any question. Is it any questions on Sunday morning? Nikki Campbell, the big debate, I like watching Question Time on BBC on a Monday. But I'm always really disappointed that we hardly have any Sikhs. And when we do it, somebody sat in the corner at the back with a big smile on his face, just there, wanting to... I mean, haven't we got educated, articulate Sikhs who can appear on these programmes and put the Sikh case? If we haven't, then let's train them. And if we have, why aren't they there?
I think we have. I think we've got them. And there's a... we filmed, and I know it's going to be aired in the next couple of weeks. Harinder Singh from America did this Sikh and leadership lecture in PwC in London. And if you looked at that audience, there's 60, 70 people there, maybe 100, all top professionals. Why were they there? Because they love their Sikhi, they care about their religion. Otherwise, they wouldn't come, right? And it was a fantastically successful event. Those are the types of people. I think we need to give them a bit of free rein, give them the support, let them come forward. Don't put barriers in the way, and but I think it's a combination of put the barriers down and give them the support, and I think things will happen.
But it's also, again, working with individuals, what you'll find is a lot of people want to do something, but it's very much project-based. The way to get individuals engaged, rather than the whole campaign, is actually to give them a project, to identify a project that actually individuals can get involved in. Because a lot of individuals want to get involved, but they're, again, in terms of their resources and their time, it's limited. And so it's about identifying some projects, some common issues, which they can sign up to.
Let me give you a project then, and maybe Sikh Council can run with this, but I think Sikh Think Tank should work with this as well. The Sikh channel is promoting media skills. I mean, we're all kind of learning on the job, really, and none of us have been trained. Why don't we run a course? Why don't we say we want 20 Sikhs from across the country, because we need them in every town and city, and we'll run a weekend media skills training course, and these will be handpicked. We don't just pick anybody. And then the job then is for them then to hit the mainstream media. I mean, is that something that
I think that's possible, because, I mean, in terms of a lot of work I've done with, again, through where I'm working at the present moment, is in terms of looking at equality and diversity issues and corporate social responsibility. And we did some work with the BBC, I remember about 8 or 9 years ago.
Maybe they could sponsor this.
They do. They do. One of the things they want to do is they'll go into the community. They want to identify people for in the community who they can actually develop and train. And that training is useful for their perspective in terms of actually going into the community and obviously getting recognition from the community from a marketing point of view. But I think it's an ideal opportunity.
I'm sure we could run the course at Warwick or something. We'll book a room there.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, look, your University of Mines, we have media-friendly staff. We get this badge attached to certain staff. So when the BBC rings in and says, the anti-terror network has been hacked, which was a couple of days ago, can we speak to someone? They have the list of people. This is the person you go to. We don't quite have that. Now, the BBC and the media want credible people to approach. They don't want someone who's not credible speaking on the airwaves. So they would support these kind of initiatives, because they want Sikhs to speak professionally.
Wouldn't it be fantastic if we could train 15 or 20 guys, quality not quantity, who have particular expertise and can represent us?
As the director of the Sikh Think Tank, would you give a commitment, maybe together, that we will, because sometimes we give other people, should we take this on board? I mean, we can do that, can't we?
I think you're right, but I think there's also already something there on the shelf for us. I know Sikhs in England, an organisation which Harminder Singh's involved in, they've actually done media training. And again, Harminder's great in terms of he'll put it on the internet everywhere to people to do. And nobody
but where are those people then? I'm going back on Sunday morning. I'm not seeing them.
The problem is his point is he's got a course ready, but nobody's responded. So I think our challenge now is to actually identify individuals.
If you out there think that you could represent the Sikhs in the mainstream media. We're not talking about giving, David Dimbleby annual lecture. We're talking about, being able to represent the true perspective of Sikhi, articulate in English, because it's the mainstream media in English. Then email the Sikh channel on info.sikhtv. Email us, and then we will try to get people together, and let's do something. And by the way, if you're wanting to respond to today's programme as well, on the Sikh channel website, we have set up a discussion forum for the Sikh think tank. So go on there and share your thoughts. We've only got about 10 minutes now. I just want to now move us on to this last point, which probably we can only just begin the process here. We can float the idea. And then maybe we should have a special think tank just on this. And I mean, over the last few weeks, linked to the Rajwana case and the Sikhs making, for example, the abolition of the death penalty, making their case, one of the things that's emerged is that we should be peaceful, that it should be non-violent. And in fact, Rajwana himself had said that he wants it to be a peaceful, non-violent struggle. I suppose the ultimate kind of end point of peacefulness is some kind of reconciliation. Peace, reconciliation. Yes, we need justice. But just as in South Africa, as in Burma now, what's happening, as is happening in the Middle East, across the world, conflicts have to have an ending. And sometimes you have to allow the guilty, as it were, to tell the truth without then facing consequences. Otherwise, they won't come forward. I don't know who wants to kind of start with this one, but should we be developing a peace and reconciliation process?
That is a very powerful kind of process to start, which will carry with it tremendous emotions. I mean, what we've been asking for, I suppose, over the last, 2.5 decades, is for closure, some kind of closure on the heartache, and all the terrible atrocities that we've witnessed. And we're not getting that closure, or if we are getting it at snail's pace. Now, let's be quite frank. There are people who have been charged, who have gone through the judicial process for what they've done in 1984. We saw, the whole Kishori Lal case and a number of others. But it seems to move at such a slow snail's pace that we don't seem to have the patience. But nevertheless, we're looking for closure, and it's in the interests of the Indian government that they achieve that closure as well. And I think a peace and reconciliation process of some kind would be absolutely ideal. The problem we have, I think, and I'm sorry to sound negative, but are all the egos and the emotions getting the better of us in the process. For instance, if there is someone sitting there saying, yes, I did do this, I was the one responsible for hacking, 15 Sikhs that day, how do we deal psychologically with that whole process? Could we end up, even though it's supposed to be a peace and reconciliation process, could we end up causing more damage? But that's me being more cynical than I really ought
Let's
to
be
be.
concrete. Let me give you a concrete. Sajjan Kumar, Jagdish Titler.
Yes.
Everybody knows, and they know that they did that. It's beyond. Everybody knows that. But because of the Indian legal system, they will, by hook or crook, keep delaying and delaying till the day they die. The problem is all those victims will never be able to see them admitting to what they've done. Surely it's better to say, let's have a commission, come out, come clean, save your own soul, and maybe you can also help other people. Isn't that better than just...
No, I agree with you in one sense. I think for me it's a process. If we're saying the Truth Reconciliation Commission is it, that won't work. If you look at what happened in South Africa, actually it was the state that admitted that there was wrongdoings, and the state in a certain way instigated the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that's why it went off the ground. Although there were individuals lobbying for it, the state hadn't agreed to it, it wouldn't have happened. But that's beside the point. I think the important thing for us is the test, what you've just said, that will be a test of our Sikhi.
Yes.
What does Sikhi say to us? Sikhi talks about forgiveness, and that will test, actually, have we got the Sikhi aspect in us? If we are true to Sikhi, if we're true to following the principles and philosophy of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, what's contained in the Guru Granth Sahib, then forgiveness is ultimate there. But just before we go on that, I think that would be excellent. But I think what's more, the reason why I say it's part of a process, that will not stop future events happening again. That will not stop another 84 riots in Delhi or the riots in Gujarat. Yeah. What you have to look at is a framework, a legal, constitutional framework, alongside that commission, that will actually prevent those things happening again. And that's the reason, in terms of, because of the injustices, the demand for a separate Sikh state has come. So I think it's a process.
Jeet, when we saw the peace process in Northern Ireland, the various forces, the various armed forces on both sides were given a window of opportunity. They were said, look, come forward by this date, you'll have immunity from prosecution. And many people came forward who had killed like a lot of people. In tears, in fact, they were saying that it helped them to deal with their own nightmares. Surely that's better than people being locked in prison. This is unofficial, and I wouldn't want to kind of stake anything on this, but there are some noises coming out of India from very high circles saying, look, if the Sikhs are prepared to come forward, we are sure the government will come forward. If Daital and others are given a way out, then we might be able to get the prisoners out of the Sikh, all the Sikh prisoners. Yeah. Isn't that a way forward?
Well, look, it was John Major, wasn't it, who started the
Good Friday,
the discussions with the opposition, shall we say, in Ireland, right? Yeah. And Tony Blair carried it on. In other words, you've got to have dialogue as the beginning of the process of closure. Right? Now, if you talk about Truth and Reconciliation Commission, they had it in South Africa. I know in the late 90s it was tried in Punjab. Some retired judges began it, and they called various police officers to come forward, but then it was all...
I think it was Chandrasekhar was the president at the time, and he invited some of the so-called Kharku Jathebandiyas to come to
I don't know, but I remember some retired judges in Punjab just got it up and running, but there was no state support for it, and it was quickly put down. And I think that's the reason why, for a real Truth and Reconciliation Committee, you've got to have the state support for it. Now, I'll say one other thing. Actually, I'm going to say two other things. One, I think one of the things we've said here today is, there's plenty of goodwill out there. There's a new generation of people who are willing to help. I don't want that to be seen as a denigration of the people who've been working hard in the last 30-odd years. Those people who've been going on the marches and the demonstrations, they are the backbone of Sikhi, right? Yeah. No way at all should we put them down. But there is more help that can be provided. And the second thing I would say is, as I said, for this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you're going to need state support. How can you get it? One of the things I always think about is, it's a funny thing, isn't it, that in Sikhi, people will en masse come and follow a particular individual, a Baba, a Sant, or what have you. And I'm not going to get into that territory. But what I find interesting is mass movements start behind a particular individual. That means there is a feeling there within Sikhs. There is some kind of hunger there, which is tapped into. And I think we have to find a way of tapping into that motivation and direct it towards the outcomes that we want. And I think if you get that mass movement behind the outcome that we're seeking, then those conciliation committees will be set up.
Because we've now run out of time, so I'm going to let Jeet, that's the last word. I think it's a really good point. I think if we reflect on the Rajwana case, I mean, Saab has been there for 17 years. It's not that Rajwana has just come from another planet and just arrived. But what I think, what happened, and particularly with the media, it touched this dormant kind of consciousness, if you want, amongst the Sikh nation, this desire for justice, this desire for Sikhs to be known in the true light of Guru Nanak, of Bhai Kanhaiya, as Arjinder said, of Guru Gobind Singh Sant Sipahis, of the fighters for the oppressed. That's what Sikhi, in a sense, was created for, to challenge oppression. But unfortunately, the image that's been created that somehow Sikhs are the oppressors, and they aren't, they're the victims. So I think that we've opened up some windows of possibility here. There's a lot of discussion to take place. There are a lot of actions to be done as well. And, action and reflection go together. You can't do one without the other. So hopefully today's show we've been able to, open up some of these issues and encourage others to have dialogue. And then, having had the dialogue, not to sit in front of the TV and then wait for more dialogue, but to go out and act. There are plenty of campaigns out there. So I'd like to just once again, on behalf of my colleagues here on the panel and the Sikh channel, wish everybody, all the Sikh community, everybody who's watching now, a happy Vaisakhi. The Sikh think tank, again, the next program, I said we will probably have Harinder Singh's lecture at some point as well. But on the 28th of April, same time, 6 till 7, from the London Theatre, we're going to have a women's special. So there will be some very intelligent, very educated Sikh women who will be presenting the program. So that will be on the 28th. So, anything that we've said against Sikh, if we've hurt anybody's feelings, then there's no intention. We're simply just trying to open up some kind of dialogue, and our aim is that, for Sikh kaum di chardi kala. So apa sare hi khema de jaje khan bhul juk maaf karni, sare fateh bulao ji, waheguru ji ka khalsa, waheguru ji ki fateh.